I want to welcome all of you to the Christian Alliance for Inclusive Development's monthly Welcoming Table Talk. My name's Beth Birmingham, and I facilitate the Alliance team and our network of allies and volunteers. So today is a much anticipated conversation because I've gotten a lot of emails and a lot of chatter on socials on this one. We're going to be talking about the role of philanthropy in advocating for gender equality. And I've got two beautiful colleagues who are joining us at the table today, which I'm going to introduce to you shortly. But I also wanted to note, as I said a moment ago, today's talk is sort of a preview of an event that the Alliance is hosting in June here in Philadelphia. For all of you super busy executives, it is a fly-in, fly-out event, just the kind that you like. It's called Beyond Talk, Uniting Philanthropy and Christian NGOs for Gender Equality. And so I'm grateful that our guests today, Candy Sparks of Crowell Trust and Emily Nielsen-Jones of Imago Day Fund, together with our other partner, Gretchen Hansen of the Hansen Foundation, they are what we've called our philanthropy convening partners for that event. So they are the three organizations that are saying to all of their other philanthropy friends, come join us at the table. And then together with our NGO partners, World Relief and Development Associates International and World Renew and some others. So when you go to the site for Beyond Talk, you'll see, the convening partners. And so we are really hoping to get lots of folks at the table, naysayers, people who are scared to death of this topic, people who you can list off for me 27 reasons why having more women in leadership in the faith-based sector is not a good idea. You are welcome at the table. This is not a place of fear. This is not a place of shame. This is a place where we can all discuss it and get on the journey together towards making some commitments for positive change. So we have two wonderful colleagues joining us at the table today. One is Candy Sparks. She is the Executive Director of the Crowell Trust, and she has a broad range of experiences that includes mission, education, and legal services. And Candy, I didn't know about the legal services, so I was intrigued by that, mainly because one of your close dear friends is one of my close dear friends and board member, Jane Overstreet, who also has a legal background. She combines 20 years of overseas mission work in developing countries with years of experience in the field of education as a professor, consultant, and a manager of education systems. So I love that you bring all of that goodness to the Crowell Trust, and I appreciate you so much. Candy was our very first champion of the Christian Alliance for Inclusive Development. And when you're just starting out in an initiative, which we did in the fall of 2021 with this initiative, having somebody come alongside and just say, I want to champion this with you, that means the world. And I don't say that lightly. So, and then our other dear, awesome, wonderful colleague joining us today is Emily Nielsen-Jones. And she is a founding partner and trustee of Imago Day Fund. And so in her role at the Imago Day Fund, she has helped the foundation to adopt a gender lens in its grant making, in particular focus on partnering with inspired female change agents locally and around the world to build bridges of peace and create a world where women and girls can thrive and achieve their full human potential. And so even as you just listen to that aspiration, you can understand why we're drawn together, because that's so much aligned with the Alliance's work. But what I wanted to draw particular attention to, and I think Raquel will drop this into the chat box so that you see it as well. She is the co-author and convener of a project called The Girl Child and Her Long Walk to Freedom, which invites participants to better understand the historic and religious roots of patriarchal oppression that persist in our world today. And you must visit this site. It's got wonderful resources, but even just the videos is something that can be shared throughout your organization, but also in the communities where a lot of your organizations serve. So we welcome both of you to the table today. And I, again, appreciate you taking the time for this conversation. As you may have seen from some of our postings, this is not a straightforward issue. So we're going to unpack some of the questions, that may come up in your own mind as someone in philanthropy or someone in the development space around this issue. But the topic is, what is the appropriate role of philanthropy in doing advocacy towards gender equality? And so I kind of broke our questions down into two categories. One is the more philosophical perspective. And so we know in the corporate world, thanks to Harvard, thanks to McKinsey research, all of this good stuff coming from corporate research, that when you have greater gender diversity in leadership, the organization experiences better performance outcomes. So profit margin, return on equity, greater innovation and employee engagement. My question for Candy and Emily to get us started is, in your work then engaging in nonprofits, what do you personally feel is the appropriate role that your foundation could or should be playing to encourage gender diversity with the organizations that approach you for funding?
Let me try to answer this question. First of all, what I wrote down was, I serve a trust.
Yeah.
So I'm not a principal, I'm a staff, I serve the trust. So Emily and I will have very different experiences and we will have very different responsibilities. My first responsibility is to God, my personal values, and the board whom I serve. Now, thanks be to God, those things line up. I'm so happy to say that my commitment to God and my values line up with the values of the Crowell Trust. And thanks be to God for that. Now, mind you, that being said, in any relationships, there's going to be differences, right? Whether it's with a good friend or a spouse or your working board, that's only reasonable and natural. But I think for me, what I appreciate in my role is my role of influence. At the same time that I have influence to speak, I also am careful to honor the history and the trajectory of our board and to work hard at walking in love. Now, I'm Italian and I can sometimes get a little bit feisty and I have to settle myself down. And so my board helps me actually do that. I think that things would be far worse if I were left to myself. So that's just to say that working together as a team with our board who are, oh, now somebody just told me they're Greek, so they understand. Thank you for that. So I think that creates a really good balance for us. We do share the same, I do share the same values as the board. The board is very committed to women. And so it's an honor to be able to serve and to help the board or help give recommendation or suggestion on how we can do that. So I'm thankful for our board.
Great. And we'll come back to that, one of your comments about honoring the history of the trust, because that's an interesting conversation, when the history may have been in a time, when even far fewer women were represented in, leading organizations and doing, the wonderful work that all of our Christian NGOs are doing. And so, how do you bring the board along in relevant ways, but also still recognizing that you are a servant of the board. So I appreciate that interesting crossroads in some respects. So, great. Emily, how about you? We were talking about in your work in engaging nonprofit organizations, what do you personally feel is the appropriate role of the foundation can and should be playing in encouraging gender diversity
before I can give any answers to that big question, I sort of have to start on a personal level. My first answer, I guess, is really keep it human. Whatever lane you're in, whether you work for a foundation, whether you started a foundation, whether you work for an NGO, a nonprofit, or some other intermediary, this topic impacts all of us. And there's a lot of fancy words now that I love, like gender mainstreaming, gender lens, all those things. There's so much research, as you alluded to, Beth, on this topic. It's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do, to have a diverse leadership board. But we all have a why, a personal why. And for me, when we started our foundation 15 years ago, we basically set out to learn as we go. And I went on a few donor trips with my colleague, and it wasn't long before I encountered an intolerable status quo around the world that is just way too hard in the 21st century to be born female and to grow up as a female. And my daughter at the time was at the age where a lot of bad things happen. And we had been learning about anti-trafficking. I'm like, I want to stop all the bad things that happen to girls and women. But for me, that humanity I bring, and to be honest, it was a little bit of an existential crisis, seeing how low the bar is for women and girls, and that in many places the needle is going backwards, particularly in the church and religion. So I just honor all of your personal whys, your backstory, and just invite you, whether you're in the NGO lane or the foundation lane, to just hold on to that golden thread of your own aspiration for your own life and for humankind. So my first answer to your question is keep it human, whatever lane you're in. And then the next sub point is that this is a deeply sacred trust that we're all in together. So again, this idea of we each have a lane that we're in and we can own it. But together we can say we have a shared project to do. And I think what we're asking about is the role of philanthropy in Christian relief and development, not just in general. So so the sacred trust, as I see it, is to get faith fully on board with gender equality, women's equality, fully on board. And this is really important work. If we can do this together, even just making strides forward, we are doing the world a gift, because without our religious traditions on board, the needle will keep going backwards, because the authoritarian side of religion, which is deeply patriarchal, as many people probably see, is on the rise around the world. So this is a sacred trust. And along those lines, it's a table, a welcoming table for all of us to work together to really grapple with the contradictions at the nexus of faith and gender and development. So that when I think about the word advocacy, I'm reframing it a little bit, but the way I have dealt with it, because there are nuances around philanthropy. There's imbalance of power, and so in general we see ourselves as a foundation as partnering with local change agents, partnering with NGOs like everyone here, and we don't really we don't use that word advocacy all that much, but our foundation really right from the beginning was set up to address this intolerable status quo, and do our part to transform it and partner with others to create a more gender equal world where all human beings can thrive and flourish. But having said that, I know full well from being raised in the evangelical wing of the church and just from so many conversations with amazing people around the world that the seeds of a lot of the oppression of women and girls exist right within our own traditions. So this is brave work that we're all doing. It's, it goes back so far. So when I think of the word advocacy, I really think of inviting people into a space like this to grapple with all the contradictions, where we're working on a humanitarian level to end trafficking and just ameliorate, a lot of the problems that impact women and girls. But within our own organizations, are we ourselves fully on board with the full unambiguous equality of women and girls? And
Right.
so my journey has been falling into that place of like holding those contradictions. I think looking back in the 15 years, I guess I'll end it on this, the whatever step you take, whatever layer you pull off the proverbial onion, there's another layer. The patriarchy is so deeply rooted in our own traditions, our own belief systems. And as one young woman that she was part of an organization that did have women in leadership and they believed in gender equality, but she said, there's still something in the air that I can't even name that we need to let out of the windows together. And I feel like that's what we're doing here together.
Well, and I
just
think that's a big,
together, and we're all in process together. And
that's a big, it's a big piece of the alliance identity.
Yes.
So, and letting the air out the windows, and calling. When I was back at Eastern and I'd sit in faculty meetings, people had said, we love having you in the meeting because you will say the thing that nobody else that everyone else is too afraid to say.
Yes.
And part of that's just my own silly naivete,
Well, the language you use for all this beyond talk, that I would have loved to have seen something like this a long time ago, but you've been working, so many of you have been working within Christian Relief and Development, have been doing really hard, important work within your organizations to keep beating the drum and moving the needle forward. So,
well, and our hope is that, our hope. So in the faith-based NGO sector in America, it's an 80-year-old sector. Today, we are still at only about 17% women represented at the board and executive team level, even though 70% of the workforce are women. 70% of the people who choose to write a check or swipe a credit card every month are women. And I would estimate, UN estimates 70%, 60 to 70% of the people we serve around the world are women and girls. And yet, in 2024, we are still only at about 17% women around the board and the executive team tables, less than 4% at the CEO seat. Now, to somebody who is, I love my stats, I love that research. It sounds silly. It sounds a bit absurd, And so women inside these NGOs cannot advocate for themselves without getting a target on their back and being afraid of being fired or marginalized for raising the issue too loudly. We need other partners at the table who aren't beholden to NGO boards and executive teams, who have the power to say, we're going to start asking the question when it comes time for grant submissions. How many women on your board? How many women on your executive team? How much leadership development dollars do you invest in women in the organization? What percentage? And is 50% of your leadership development dollars focusing on getting young women up on that ladder, so that the pipeline is filled? Because I'm sure both of you have heard many an NGO leader sit in front of you and say, we just don't have women who are qualified to step into the vice president role. We just can't find them. People ring me up. I've got 25 years of a Rolodex of phenomenal women who should be CEOs, should have been CEOs a decade ago, So I would, so that's the question is really, what do you view the more direct advocacy and encouragement role of philanthropy in trying to change these dynamics and joining with women around the world who serve the poor, who want to be, have a greater voice. Go ahead and share some of your journey into, on the gender equality.
So, gosh, being the age that I am, I was in school before Title IX. I would have loved to have been an athlete. That opportunity did not exist. It's hard to believe. So for me, I feel like there has been progress, and I'm so thankful that there's been progress, at least in some areas, in some regions. But being raised in an Italian home, it was very male dominated. So from that time on, the church was very male dominated, although the women did all the work in the church. And then being in missions, even though I was in a mission that said that they supported women in ministry, it was the exception rather than the opportunity that would be natural.
Yeah.
So when I came into this position at the Crowell Trust, I was so ready to lead. Oh, it's been so much fun leading. So I waited, I never thought I was going to be given this opportunity to lead. And so it's been a joy because I served in the background for a very, very long time. So I definitely have a heart motivation to, make a way for other women globally to be able to have leadership opportunities.
Right. Well, and I think with some folks that I've had conversations with in the philanthropy space, they've had very funny stories to share about, how do you approach the topic of women or lack of women in the organizations that you partner with? How do you go about approaching it? Is it something that comes up in conversation, or is it part of your grant application? I think Imago Day might have some of those questions in the application.
We have a great team, and we sort of formalized how we deal with some of these contradictions into just asking good questions in our application process, in the due diligence that the program team does. Just asking, how many women do you have on the board? What is your senior leadership team like? So I guess that is advocacy, and just like asking questions, having the back women, you know what I mean, unseen. Because Beth, I know your story. I've heard many people, and but in some ways, just asking questions and then putting a spotlight on the change we want to see in the world and amplifying that. Well, like the World Relief, and I wasn't sure if someone else did the scorecard, the gender scorecard, the Wheaton Initiative, like basically say, let's hold a mirror to ourselves, and how can we move forward so that women don't get stuck at the mid-level, so they really, this is World Relief, and they really, it was just such a great model for all of us to say.
And for those of you interested in that, they'll be presenting a workshop at the Belonging Conference in June that walks you through exactly how they executed that scorecard and where they are today with it. Thanks for bringing that up. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And we're all in process. That was another point, just to embrace with humility. We're all in process toward being the racially balanced and gender balanced, just to have diverse leadership teams. So on the foundation side, we've had a lot to learn and grow around race, and even having men engage. So I think the idea that the long walk to freedom and to shared flourishing is just we're walking that together, and just if we're moving forward, then we won't move backwards. So just keep trying to move forward.
And I think just, having that in applications, because I know Candy, Crowell Trust's application also asked for diversity around, the leadership of the organization. So there's a whole section of your application. I'd be curious from both of you, when you collect that data and you find that you've got, these applications of organizations that are all, men in leadership, et cetera. And then you've got organizations that have wonderful diversity. Does the data that you collect play any influence in choosing, either how much to award an organization, or if you will, issue a grant to an organization? So it's one thing to capture the data because it's interesting, but the other thing that the Alliance is advocating that it be used as a rubric of sorts, because when you're supporting a diverse organization, so I'd be curious how the information's used.
We ask the question on our application: has your organization taken steps to moving towards gender and ethnic diversity among your staff, your management, your executive leadership and board? If so, how? And then the next question is, please share available data. If you are an educational institution, please include students and faculty in your response.
Okay.
Then if I could share my screen, I'll show you. Lori Drexler, our program officer, prepared this slide that I'm going to show here. So this is comparing 2014 to 2024. And Lori, why don't you just jump in and mention what we see here?
Sure. So this is just a really small snapshot of the organizations that we funded in 2014 that we're still funding today, 10 years later. And we kind of just rated them based on how many females they had on their board. And so you can kind of see the change in these organizations, which we're encouraged by, that we see 11 go up to 20 that at least have 25% or more women.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lori. So you could say, that's really slow change, and we need it to be faster, but it is change. It is change. And what Lori didn't share is that the organizations, how many were there, Lori, that were on
There was another 34 that we're not funding, that the Crowell Trust is not funding today. And over half of those were on that red side. And so we weren't necessarily intentional about not funding them anymore, but when we look back in observation, we feel like it's more an effectiveness issue that is the reason that maybe they're not still funded. That could be tied to women.
Yeah. And what it used to be, I think maybe not so much anymore, but this was a very strong focus where we were really digging into this. We would ask every organization that we met with to talk to us about their staff, talk to us about in general, and so often, of course, we would get that, we have the most incredible women on our staff. And they would give us a percentage of how many of their workers are women. And then, of course, we would go on to the next comment. And interestingly enough, in preparing for this meeting today, I wrote some of the organizations that recently, I wrote the CEOs. And one of the most fun things about working at a foundation, you guys, is that people actually answer your emails. It's the greatest thing.
It's the power that you hold. It's the privilege that you hold, whether you like it or not.
We know that. Yes, we're well aware. So they answer us. So anyway, that's just to say that I wrote to 3 organizations that had no women, 0, none. And I said to them, hey, would you mind telling me, we know that, you're increasing in the number of women in executive leadership and on your board. Can you tell me about that journey? Yeah. Only one of them said, well, it's because you guys kept on talking to us about this.
Okay.
And that happened to be an engineering ministry that was mostly male dominated. But now they've got great representation from women. But a couple of the other organizations said, it's really made a difference.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, you know, I always knew it would.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
A positive difference. But, you know, that's one thing that we do is we talk and we ask and we continue to ask and we continue to ask for more information. So, oh, the other thing I wanted to say is that Lori, when she came into this world in 2004 of Christian Philanthropy, she, and there was one other woman, but that other woman wasn't from a Christian foundation. That was in our professional association. So Lori was the only Christian woman. And now today, let's see, Kelsey, do you know the exact number? Would there be over half that are women now in our professional Christian philanthropy organization?
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. So, wow, that's good.
Yeah.
So we do the same thing. And a lot of it is conversational in the same way that you're describing. We also fund outside the Christian relief and development context. And that was one of my other bullet points, was like, get out of the Christian bubble, because there's a lot to learn about using a gender lens, just from great nonprofits, great NGOs. And we helped fund a study with Gordon College. I forget how many years ago, someone else can, but we were looking at the basically Christian nonprofits. This was in the US versus secular nonprofits. And by every category, the Christian nonprofits were behind by a lot. But so that's just a reference point that there's a lot we can learn from just good humans doing this work. And yes, it is. There's so much research that shows that having women on boards, women in leadership teams, the ethos is different. It's less top down. The first organization, when we formalized our gender lens, I'll leave out the names, but there were a couple, I probably have a different style than you, Candy, a little bit, whatever. But this was an organization that I was a part of, and they were trying to launch at the college I went to. And I said, well, you know, in our philanthropy, we have formalized using a gender lens. And what that means is we just asked, do you have any views around gender that apply to your organization? And, you know, I'd love to hear about the percentage of women on your leadership team and board. And he basically said, well, actually, a lot of Christian organizations won't admit it, but we are honest and we do have a complementary, you know, he used language like that. And said, so we don't, so anyway, it ended up being like just a reminder, like, okay, there are a lot of organizations that are not really working for gender equality. They obviously don't want women to be exploited, but, you know, so I think there's the dialogue around, like, what is the end game that we're working toward? What is the mountain we're trying to move together? You know, is it just humanitarian, or do we want, you know, real gender balance? And for us, we sort of, at this iteration of who we are in our last 3-year strategic plan, we kind of doubled down on gender equality, and really with the premise that without gender equality, without gender balance, all of the other SDGs will not be achieved. So it's sort of a precondition to healthy organizations and healthy just way of being human together. So you know, back to the language of advocacy, I do think I hear in that word, like, you know, we should have the back of organizations and women who have been working really hard. So I think there's a role, like we kind of ask for the information, and I don't have the data, but we wouldn't fund an organization that doesn't have women, you know, represented in the senior leadership team and on the board.
So, you know, the simple asking of the questions, you know, the simple posting of the social media posts that we keep putting out are just getting people to stop and think and ask those questions of, what is our organization like for the women who work in it? We say that we care about women and girls around the world, but is that reflected by the way that we empower and elevate the women who do that serving inside our NGOs? You know, so exactly what you're doing is exactly what I would call a form of, advocacy. But then we're also curious for the next step is what does, how do we encourage these organizations with supporting them with funding for leadership development programs to intentionally develop those women leaders? Because that's another excuse that I've heard for way too long. And you got to remember, before I started this work a few years ago, I spent 25 years doing leadership development with, all of these NGOs. So I have thousands of alumni. And what the comment was, we can't find any women who fit. That word fit is, tricky, who fit the model of senior leaders organization.
I think that comes back to what we honor, just that there's a patriarchal norm. It just, our Bibles were written in a patriarchal time, a lot of the stories, and there's something other than just wanting, even believing in gender equality. It's learning to honor the feminine and not have a masculine view of what it means to be a leader, allowing the women in the organization to shape the ethos and the values and what is seen as honorable.
We raised the issue of how far we've come. So if you do look at the research, we need to get to, this is another question I get asked, how much is enough? How many women are enough? And corporate research, McKinsey, Harvard, 35%. 35% of your board, 35% of your executive team is where we start to see the organizational culture move towards welcoming both the masculine and the feminine perspective. So 1 or 2 is still a struggling, but an organization on a journey. And so we do want to appreciate that. I want to be mindful of our time, an opportunity for some Q&A time.
What do you think the role, what would you, if you're working for an NGO, what would you like Philanthropy to do more of so we could be better
That's a great
advocates?
question.
I'm not sure if this directly answers that question, but I think something that came to mind as both of you were sharing, or like a question that came to mind, is the connection between seeing females represented in philanthropy and in the NGO space. And when you have that continuity of female representation from funders to those, to INGOs, to those implementing the project, what practically happens in terms of how that changes the impact of a project happening on the ground. And what came to mind for me, I previously worked in Nepal with a Christian INGO there. I was on a site visit, visiting a women's savings and nutrition group. Those of us representing my organization happened to be all female, and the women from our funding organization were all female, and we were visiting this all women's group. So we were sitting in this big group together, and it was all women, the funders, the kind of in between INGO, the local implementing partner. And the women in that savings group commented, we knew there was something different about this relationship and this project. It's all women. And it just made me think, it made me recognize that there's not just an impact in terms of equity and representation, but there's something felt all the way through those relationships. And, I think I've personally noticed a lot of women tend to be more open and honest about what's working well and not working well in this project, or being honest about how their children are being impacted by, nutrition or economic improvement. So I think my question is, I'm just curious how you've seen the impact of more female involvement in philanthropy, even on the ground level.
Right. Yeah. So our foundation has been very female dominated, our staff, but I think in general, I just want to mirror back what you're saying. And there is, in philanthropy, there is a patriarchal tilt as well. I've encountered women who, were born into wealthy families who had to, actually the founder of Women Moving Millions is a woman of faith, and she was a mentor, and she had to advocate, to be part of basically the inheritance. And, so that is a level to this conversation as well, that, women doing philanthropy. I mean, you can't stereotype, but I know that I've been more, I don't buy into the rules of the road of a lot of things, including capitalism. So just, how we give, how much we give. I know that women do tend to, like Mackenzie Scott is an example, like she's, and I don't put myself in the same category, but so on the philanthropic side, women do make different decisions. And I think, as mothers, as women, we feel solidarity with mothers around the world, and just human solidarity, and we don't always buy into all of everything has to be a return on investment. There's a lot of orthodoxies in philanthropy, just like there are religion, that you can just don't really, if you're listening, I think women maybe listen to their hearts more. So I would say, just what you're saying about women's leadership in a nonprofit, in an NGO, I think in general, women are more collaborative and, really do tend to see things less in like silos, and top down. But anyway, I love people who are working on the NGO side. I think, can we make this an open conversation, not just like, what have you all seen, to answer Daphne's question?
It's these are complex issues. Our brothers in the Lord, there's some, I think the bottom line is that we all want to strive and should strive to be more like Jesus. And so, when we're with people that are like Jesus, then we're comfortable, right? I feel like I can be me. I can be a woman. I can use the intuitive side of me that's very strong. It's okay if I even cry, and I have cried in our board room. And just having that liberty of having the feminine side, reaching out to our grantees, reaching out to the people that come in to see us. I am so thankful that I have the comfort level now to do that and to be who I am.
There are a lot of layers to this topic, to this issue, and I hope you all felt that you got a nice teaser and a nice taste. I just want to say thank you again to Emily and Candy, and for everyone joining us today. If you want to give them your applause, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experiences, your passion. I mean, that came through so clearly. And this is a wonderful taste of where we're going to be going in the conversation when we gather together in June. So if you fit into that category of being able to continue this conversation with us, join us for Beyond Talk on June 12th and 13th in Philadelphia. Wonderful, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day. God bless you. And we will see you next month at the Welcoming Table Talk.